Aesop's Fable Toastmasters Club. She's going to tell us a wonderful story, so let's just switch it on over to you. Angela, take it away.
Okay, great. I love the movie, and being caught in a Halloween store in the middle of the night seemed pretty scary. But have you ever been caught in a graveyard in the middle of the night?
No.
No, well, I didn't think so. I lived in a small town, and there was a graveyard right next to the church, right in the middle of town. Everybody used the graveyard as a shortcut. Okay, you went to school, you went across the graveyard, you went shopping, you went across the graveyard. And as a child, I would go across the graveyard to go to school. But we only did this in the daytime. And we were very careful not to step on any graves because we didn't want somebody's ghost coming out and grabbing us, okay? But there was one man who actually was brave enough to go across the graveyard at night. That was Mr. Jones. See, he had a house really close to the graveyard, and every morning when he left for work, he'd go across the graveyard. And at nighttime, he didn't want to walk all the way around, so he just came through the graveyard again. Well, this one time was a couple of days before Halloween. Mr. Jones is coming through the graveyard, and all of a sudden he just stops. It was a little bit dark, and he sort of looked around because he thought he had heard something. And he listened carefully, and he heard this voice saying, "Turn me over, turn me over, turn me over." Well, he thought it was the wind because it was a pretty windy day and it turned into a windy night. But he just walked a little bit faster and he got home and he told his wife and his kids what had happened to him. And his wife just said, "Oh dear." And his kid says, "Daddy, there's nothing in the graveyard." Well, next day he got up and he goes to work across the graveyard. And at night, it's time to come home. And he's thinking, I wonder if I'm going to hear that same voice. He's walking through and he's walking a little faster. And he hears the voice again saying, "Turn me over." And it's moaning, "Turn me over." And then it got louder, "Turn me over." Oh, well, Mr. Jones, he didn't walk fast. He ran all the way across that graveyard to his house. He got to his house. And his wife said again, "Oh dear." And his kid says, "Daddy, there's nothing in the graveyard." Well, the last day, it was Halloween. And Mr. Jones, he goes to work through the graveyard. And he is going home again through the graveyard. But it's one of those wet, rainy, windy nights, and you can hear the wind in the trees, woo, woo, and you can see the branches moving all over. And he is walking through the graveyard really carefully. And this time he heard the voice, and it was almost a shriek, and it was going, "Turn me over, turn me over, turn me over." And Mr. Jones was a brave man. He said, "If that's a ghost, I am going to find it." And he took off through the graveyard, down one path, and around some trees, and down another path. And he kept walking, and he kept hearing the voice. Sometimes it would be really low, "Turn me over." And it was dark, and the wind going through the trees. And finally he figured out that the voice was coming from over there. And he started walking, and he saw a huge crypt where bodies are buried underground. He got to the crypt, and there was a big metal gate. And he put his hand on the gate, and he opened that gate. And then he started into the crypt, and it went down. He started counting the stairs carefully as he went down. 1, 2, 3. There were 13 stairs all the way to the bottom. And at the bottom, there was a big wooden door. And underneath the door, he could see a little light escaping. And Mr. Jones went down, and he put one hand on the door, and he pushed it. But it wouldn't budge. And then he took his other hand, and with all his might, he pushed open that door. The door swung open, and he stood there, staring into the room. As he looked around, on the floor in front of him was a huge pile of glowing red coals, letting off heat and light that filled the room. And over the glowing red coals was a metal grill. And on top of the grill, there was a hamburger. And the hamburger was all done on one side, and he could hear the voice from the hamburger saying, "Turn me over, pleading, turn me over, turn me over." And Mr. Jones looked around and he saw a spatula. It was big, it was heavy, he had to use 2 hands. He grabbed that spatula and he flipped that burger. And the burger said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." That's the story.
Thank you. Give Angela a big hand, come on.